the referees. Now, this is going to take me a minute here because we're going to get into a subject here where there's a million different opinions and you see so much fighting about things, but people are fighting about the wrong thing. They're fighting about the wrong thing. You see this consistently in hockey. You see it in football. I don't watch basketball, but everybody tells me it's the same way in basketball. How can you call that? How can they call that? So you'll have this egregious call, or it feels and looks egregious to us, right? And we will say, well, how can they call that? And the response will be, well, that is holding. It is pass interference. It was a cross check. It was. Here's the thing. The way the NFL rule book is laid out, 90%, at least 90%. That might be low, but on 90% of the plays, you could call a half dozen penalties. You could rewatch film and find one or two holding issues, illegal hands to the face issues between the linemen on just about every play. You could find pass interference or holding or contacting the wide receiver past the line past the 5 yards. You could find it on every play. You can find pick plays on a consistent basis. You can find false starts on a consistent basis. Every play, for the most part, if you just sat there and with the rule book in one hand and had eyeballs on every situation going out there, you could call multiple penalties on just about every play. The point of how can you make that holding call now, or how can you call that pass interference now? The point about those things is it's not that we don't think it was technically by the rule book pass interference, because it was. But like Barbosa said, the rules are more like guidelines, okay? And because if you called the rule book in quotes on every play, there would be penalties on every play. The problem that most of us have is not that what we're seeing is not pass interference or holding. It is when those things are being called. And that is how the referees, in my opinion, are controlling the game. It's not about whether or not that guy had his hand up a little bit too high, or the cornerback had his hand on the wide receiver's waist just a hair second too long. It's not about the technicality of whether it was or was not a penalty. The problem comes in never knowing when that penalty is going to be called, and the odd coincidence between the level of sports betting being legalized around the country with the number of calls that seemingly go any one particular team's way that are huge, game-changing, momentum-changing, odds-changing calls. And that is the crux of, I won't even call it my conspiracy theory. I'm just going to call it my theory, okay? So hear me out here, because the argument that most of the people say is, well, how you can't have that many people that know, right? When people talk about that the sports books are somehow paying the referees, people say, well, come on. How would that work? How would that even work? Well, I'm going to give you a theoretical example. And this carries over into hockey too. I've talked about this couple weeks ago when the Panthers clearly were jobbed by the referees against the Maple Leafs. Every referee group is normally a crew, right? You have a crew of guys that work together for most of the time. They're in the same games. Now, in terms of the betting, okay, and now the numbers I'm going to use now are made up. They're hypothetical. They're just for the example, okay? let's assume that that Vegas assumes that they are going to win 53% of these specific bets, win and loss bets. They're going to win 53% of the bets and they're going to lose 47%. Okay. My opinion of what's going on is the books are just simply trying to increase their odds. So where it would normally be 53%, they might get ahead of the bettors. Maybe they're trying to up that to 56, 57, maybe even 60%, where it's a 60% to 40% time where the books are winning. So how would you do that? Well, you have certain crews like we talked about. Now, every team across the board has a group of referees where we know, oh, those guys are working our game, we're screwed. And it consistently happens where a certain group of refs, a certain crew will have either pro this particular team calls or calls that make it look like something fishy is going on. So what you do is if you're Vegas, if you're the books, is you have your, we'll just use the teams from yesterday. You have your Kansas City crew or you have your Cincinnati crew. And when you need to increase the possibility, depending on how things have been bet, when you need to increase the possibility that the Bengals are going to win a game, you have that crew referee the game. When you need to increase the odds that Kansas City will win the game, you'll have that crew ref the game, or at least you'll have one guy in the crew where his job is to make it as not obvious as possible, to make it not obvious that you are consistently making calls that are going to increase the odds that one certain team is going to win and one certain team is going to lose. So, it may not always be, it's not a specific set thing. It's not like they get a voicemail at halftime and say, hey, call holding, okay? It's not like that. They go into the game knowing that percentage-wise, what their job in that game is to call 3 penalties, 5 penalties at the right opportune moment that are technically penalties, but they will help to sway the changes in the score of the game. It's not a perfect system, and that's the way they like it, because they can't just go out there and every single time, right? Every single time this crew works a Kansas City Chiefs game, the Chiefs win and it's by 20 points. You can't go out there and manipulate things to that level. But if you don't think there's money involved here, I can understand the frustration, because we don't really have any proof. All we have is our eyes and our intuition. And the thing of it is that a lot of times the fan bases will fight amongst themselves. Like they'll say, well, nobody's trying to help the Panthers and nobody's trying to help the Leafs and nobody's, they're not fixing it for the Patriots or whoever. The name on the team doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who the teams are. It's where have the bets been placed? Where have the bets been placed? Okay. Where is Vegas most vulnerable? And of course, they're going to take their losses and they're going to have their times where they, work things a little bit to make it not as obvious. But the flip side to that is that sometimes the referees have to make some egregious game-changing calls, even if it's not going to immediately change the outcome of the game, but because that's what they've been tasked to do. Okay, if you go into the game and you're, in quotes, the Kansas City ref, okay, you know that at some point during that game, you have to make however many, 3, 4, 5 calls that later on you can go back and say, well, I tried, I did this, right? I called that pass interference when the play before it should have been offensive pass interference, and I missed that, right? All right. I called the late hit on Asai, even though the one Bengals player was being held up around the neck as Mahomes was scrambling around on the very same play. So that referee can say, I did this, I did that, I did this. I did the best I could to sway the events of this game in one particular way.